The tension was already thick before the cameras rolled. Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp mind and even sharper composure, was scheduled to appear on a popular political debate show to discuss a new controversial bill on national policing reform. Sitting across from her, Dan Bongino, the fiery conservative commentator with a reputation for turning interviews into shouting matches. Producers expected fireworks, but what they got would make headlines for a week. The moment Jasmine sat down, she greeted everyone with a calm smile. "Good morning," she said, adjusting her blazer. Dan, already fuming before the segment even began, gave her a cold glance. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered into his mic. As the countdown ended and the red light lit up, the host welcomed the viewers. "Today we have a very important discussion," he said. Joining us, former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Dan didn't wait. "No offense," he snapped, "but I'm tired of people like you pushing this ridiculous agenda." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, calmly watching him. He wasn't finished. "You sit there acting like you know what's best for law enforcement when you've never worn the badge, never put your life on the line, and never had to face what real officers go through." The host tried to interject, but Dan kept going, his voice climbing, his hands slamming the table for emphasis. Jasmine didn't flinch. She gently leaned forward, folded her hands, and spoke. Her first words stopped everyone cold. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. With Dan Bongino still bristling across from her, the studio fell into a rare silence, not because Dan had finished yelling, but because everyone was waiting to see how she'd respond. Jasmine calmly adjusted the mic on her lapel and began with just 5 words. "Are you finished, Mr. Bongino?" Dan scoffed. "Don't talk down to me." She continued, unfazed. "I asked a simple question, not to talk down, but to give you the floor you clearly needed. Now, if I may," her tone was smooth. Controlled. Almost surgical. "Your rant," she said, "was passionate, I'll give you that. But passion without facts is just noise." Dan tried to interrupt, but she lifted her hand gently. "You claimed I don't understand law enforcement," she said. "Let's clarify, I serve on the House Judiciary Committee. I've read more about policing standards, federal oversight, and constitutional rights in 1 week than most people read in a year." The host blinked, turning toward her with genuine interest now. Dan, however, clenched his jaw. "That's just paperwork. That's not the real world." Jasmine gave a small nod. "Then let me bring you the real world," she replied. "Because I didn't come here to play politics. I came here with receipts." She reached down and pulled out a folder. Dan narrowed his eyes. "Would you like to go line by line?" she asked. "Because I'm happy to walk you through every single case that proves this bill isn't an attack on law enforcement, it's an investment in accountability." The studio was dead quiet now. Even the host leaned in closer. Dan Bongino shifted in his seat, visibly rattled. Jasmine Crockett opened the folder slowly, deliberately. No theatrics, just clarity. She held up the first page. "Let's begin with the Thompson Report, a bipartisan audit on law enforcement misconduct over the last decade. It highlights exactly why reform is necessary. Not to punish officers, but to protect both the public and the badge." Dan interrupted, "You're cherry-picking." She smiled softly. "No, Mr. Bongino. I'm documenting." The host raised an eyebrow, sensing something rare, a guest dismantling fury with precision. Jasmine continued. "You shouted about putting your life on the line. I respect that. But leadership requires more than adrenaline. It requires accountability. When good officers speak up, they're often silenced. When bad ones act with impunity, people suffer." Dan leaned forward. "You're smearing every cop in America." "No," she said firmly. "I'm protecting the ones who deserve to wear the badge with pride, by making sure the ones who dishonor it don't drag the rest down." That line landed like a brick. The host, stunned, looked into the camera. Social media was already lighting up. Dan was speechless, just for a moment, and Jasmine seized it. "I'm not here to shout," she said. "That's your style. Mine is building laws, not volume." The audience watching at home could feel the momentum shift. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending a policy. She was flipping the entire narrative. Dan Bongino couldn't take it anymore. "You're twisting everything," he snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "You talk a good game, but none of that helps when a criminal pulls a weapon. You sit in a suit while real people bleed." The host leaned in, eyes wide, unsure whether to cut to commercial. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she calmly folded the document back into her folder and looked him square in the eye. "You think yelling makes you right?" she asked. "Because if it did, Congress would be silent." The host cracked a smile, but Jasmine pressed on. "I've stood with grieving mothers, I've sat with officers afraid to call out their own departments. I've watched communities beg for solutions while people like you scream into microphones hoping to go viral." Dan leaned back, lips tight. "And here's the truth," she said, voice low and firm. "This isn't about disrespecting law enforcement. It's about building trust, so that when an officer shows up, people aren't afraid. They feel protected. If that offends you, maybe you've been yelling so long, you forgot how to listen." Boom. Silence. Even the host didn't know what to say. The control room was stunned. The live chat was exploding. Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply leaned back in her chair, hands folded, and looked into the camera like she was speaking to the entire country. And that's when the moment went viral. Within minutes of the broadcast, clips of Jasmine's calm takedown were everywhere. A 47-second video titled, "Jasmine Crockett Shuts Down Dan Bongino Without Raising Her Voice," hit X, formerly Twitter, and had over 1 million views in just 2 hours. One user posted, "She didn't just respond, she educated him on live TV. That's how you handle rage, with facts and grace." Another wrote, "Dan Bongino yelled for 5 minutes. Jasmine Crockett buried him in 30 seconds, and never even raised an eyebrow." Even people who didn't usually align with Crockett politically admitted she had owned the moment. Meanwhile, Dan's supporters scrambled to defend him, claiming the segment was edited or unfair. But the full broadcast was already uploaded by multiple media outlets. The evidence was there, uncut and unfiltered. And Jasmine? She didn't tweet. She didn't boast. Instead, her office quietly issued a statement: "Congresswoman Crockett is committed to progress through dialogue, not volume. Let the facts speak louder than shouting." Back in the studio, the host finally broke the tension. "Well," he said, "that was something." Dan scowled. "Yeah, something scripted." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I thought you liked unscripted." The host grinned. "We'll be right back after this break." But by then, the damage was done. Jasmine Crockett had stayed calm. And the country had heard every word. The next morning, every major news outlet was talking about it. Crockett crushes Bongino in calm debate showdown. CNN, Jasmine's viral mic drop moment dominates political discourse. Politico, Dan Bongino gets schooled on live TV. The Hill clips of the exchange were now being remixed into TikToks, reaction videos, and even late-night comedy segments. One comedian quipped, "Dan Bongino brought a bullhorn to a chess match, and got checkmated in 4 moves." Inside conservative circles, the spin machine worked overtime. Bongino went live on his podcast later that day, calling the segment a hit job. "Crockett didn't win anything," he said angrily. "She was just rehearsed. That wasn't debate, that was performance." But even in his own comments section, opinions were split. One viewer commented, "Dan, yelling over a calm woman who brought facts isn't a win. It's embarrassing." Meanwhile, Jasmine kept her silence. She didn't do interviews. She didn't respond to trolls. She simply posted a single photo of her sitting at the debate table, composed and still, with the caption, "Composure is power." That tweet alone hit 5 million views by evening. Behind the scenes, producers of the debate show were already scrambling to invite her back. News networks wanted her. Think tanks reached out. Even university professors were assigning the clip in communications classes. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She owned a cultural moment. Inside Capitol Hill, the ripple effect was immediate. Several lawmakers who had previously dismissed Jasmine as too new or too soft-spoken were now reassessing her, not just as a congresswoman, but as a rising force in national politics. In a closed-door meeting, one senior senator leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "She didn't just go viral. She made Bongino look like a headline from 10 years ago." Even some conservative staffers admitted quietly that Jasmine had done the impossible, neutralized one of their loudest voices with nothing but clarity and poise. Meanwhile, in her office, Jasmine was working late. Her chief of staff entered with a grin. "Your schedule just exploded," he said, laying down a stack of media requests. 3 late-night shows, 2 think tank panels, a Harvard invitation, and, he glanced at his phone, a call from a former president's advisor who wants to meet privately. Jasmine looked up from her notes. "I didn't go on that show to get famous," she said plainly. "I went to defend the bill." "I know," he replied. "That's exactly why it worked." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Let them chase the noise. I'll stay with the truth." The door closed behind him as she turned back to her work. Because while Dan Bongino ranted into a microphone about media setups and liberal traps, Jasmine Crockett was preparing her next move, not in sound bites, but in strategy. And America was still watching. The following week, Jasmine Crockett returned to Capitol Hill, and something was different. People noticed. Other lawmakers who used to brush past her in the halls now stopped to shake her hand. Reporters called her the voice of reason in a world of noise. Even staffers from opposing parties gave her nods of reluctant respect. But Jasmine wasn't distracted by the spotlight. She walked into a bipartisan committee meeting on policing reform, the very topic she had defended on live TV, carrying the same folder she brought to the debate with Bongino. But this time, no one rolled their eyes when she opened it. During the meeting, one skeptical representative raised a hand and said, "Congresswoman Crockett, before last week, I wasn't sure this bill had legs. But now, I think the conversation's changed." She looked around the room. It had. The viral moment hadn't just boosted her popularity, it forced people to actually listen. Later that day, as reporters crowded outside the chamber, one journalist shouted, "Congresswoman, any comment on Dan Bongino saying he let you talk to avoid a meltdown?" Jasmine stopped, looked directly into the camera, and smiled. "Interesting theory," she said. "But I don't yell to be heard. I prepare to be respected." The clip made its way back to Dan's podcast within hours. He raged again, louder this time, but the public had already drawn its conclusion. One woman had stayed calm. The other had lost control. And for the first time in years, a viral political moment wasn't about outrage, it was about composure. News cycles kept spinning, but one story held steady: Jasmine Crockett's calm under pressure. Late-night hosts were still replaying the moment, but now pundits were doing full breakdowns of her body language, her tone, her strategy. One anchor called it a masterclass in modern political debate. She didn't win with words, she won with presence. Meanwhile, students at multiple universities had already started dissecting the exchange in communications and political science classes. Professors held up the clip as an example of how women, especially those underestimated, can use control, clarity, and conviction to disarm even the loudest critics. Even Jasmine's opponents were cautious now. A conservative commentator tweeted, "Say what you want about her politics, but Jasmine Crockett handled Bongino better than anyone in years." That's not soft. That's surgical. Dan Bongino, still furious, did multiple follow-up rants. He blamed producers. He blamed editing. At one point, he even claimed the lights in the studio had messed with his timing. But the damage was done. Clips of Jasmine's line, "You've been yelling so long, you forgot how to listen," were now stitched into music remixes, animation parodies, and reaction videos. Even a young woman on TikTok lip-synced the quote with a coffee mug and the caption, "Me at the family dinner table with my uncle." Back in her district, Jasmine's constituents rallied behind her. Supporters showed up to her next town hall wearing shirts that said, "Composure is power." Jasmine Crockett didn't need to clap back with insults. She changed the conversation. And in doing so, she rewrote the rules of the game. Weeks passed, but the moment wouldn't fade. It became more than a viral clip. It became a cultural reset, a reminder that power doesn't always come from volume. Sometimes, it comes from silence, timing, and precision. Jasmine Crockett continued her work on the Judiciary Committee, now with a new wave of national attention. Her inbox overflowed with invitations, not just from media, but from educators, advocacy groups, and even former critics who now wanted to collaborate on policy. In one closed-door meeting, a longtime representative leaned over and said, "You didn't just win that debate, Jasmine. You set a new standard." She nodded humbly, not seeking applause. Back on Dan Bongino's end, the rants eventually slowed. The outrage machine moved on. But something had shifted. He no longer dominated the debate stage with impunity. Others now came prepared. Calmly. Strategically. The Crockett method, they called it. And for Jasmine? She never changed her tone. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't milk the fame. She just did the work, smarter, stronger, and more visible than ever. At a women's leadership panel in D.C., someone asked her how she kept her composure during that infamous moment. She smiled, leaned into the mic, and said, "Because I wasn't there to win a shouting match. I was there to win respect." The crowd rose to their feet. And across the country, people remembered that moment, not because someone screamed, but because someone stayed silent, waited, and then spoke truth that echoed louder than any yell ever could. What Jasmine Crockett couldn't have known in that moment, sitting calmly across from a shouting Dan Bongino, was just how far the ripple would spread. A month later, a high school debate coach in Michigan posted a now viral clip of her students watching Jasmine's segment. They weren't cheering for drama. They were learning from it. One student said, "She didn't match his anger. She managed it. That's way more powerful." Meanwhile, corporate leadership coaches began referencing the moment in training sessions. Emotional control under pressure, one instructor said, is the new currency in leadership, and Jasmine Crockett just gave the blueprint. Even in international circles, the clip was subtitled in multiple languages. A journalist in France tweeted, "In an age of political chaos, an American lawmaker reminded us all, calm is not weakness. Calm is strategy." Back in D.C., Jasmine stayed the course. She wasn't chasing headlines. But headlines kept chasing her. She was invited to deliver a guest lecture at Georgetown on the subject of political rhetoric. Her talk was titled, "The Power of Precision in a Loud World." She walked onto the stage, confident and composed. The audience rose in a standing ovation before she even spoke a word. Because by now, everyone knew, when Jasmine Crockett speaks, you listen. 6 months later, the same network that aired the explosive debate invited Jasmine Crockett back. The host smiled as she sat down. "Congresswoman," he said, "your last appearance sparked national conversation. Any nerves coming back?" She leaned in with a confident smile. "No nerves. Just purpose." This time, there was no Dan Bongino across from her. Instead, a panel of policymakers, academics, and journalists waited to hear her perspective, not as a reaction, but as a leader. During the segment, the host asked, "Do you think that viral moment changed your career?" Jasmine paused, then answered, "It didn't change who I am." It reminded people to stop mistaking volume for value. And to stop underestimating quiet strength. The clip from that second interview didn't go viral like the first. But it didn't have to. The first clip had already done its job, inspiring a generation, elevating the tone of public debate, and showing the nation that dignity can disarm even the loudest aggression. As Jasmine walked out of the studio, reporters rushed toward her. "Congresswoman, will you run for Senate?" She smiled, offered no comment, and slipped into her car. But inside, she knew something had shifted, not just for her, but for politics itself. Because one woman, armed only with facts and grace, had reminded the world of a truth too often forgotten: you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to speak when it matters, and mean every word.